So I'm just going to start from a super high level. In your minds, how does a restaurant's design and architecture affect the guest experience? Hey there, Omaha. Welcome into another episode of Restaurant Hoppen. I'm your host, Dan Hoppen, and my wife works in an architecture firm, and one of my favorite things about going out with her, especially to restaurants, is when we go somewhere new, just watching her look around and see the gears start turning in her head as she takes everything in, and she's understanding about trying to figure out the why of where certain things are placed, or there's a lot of soft spaces in here that helps bring the sound down. Things that I would never think about before, but it's wildly fascinating. And it got me thinking, I would love to just learn more about this. How does a restaurant come from concept and become an actual thing that are people going to and eating? And so I have three gentlemen here tonight who all have experience opening multiple concepts, some over a dozen concepts. So they're going to give us just an awesome crash course in restaurant architecture and design. Can we give it up for our guests tonight? All right, gentlemen, I'd love to get this thing started. Can I please have you introduce yourself and then talk about you don't have to talk about all of them, but at least list off the restaurant concepts that you have in Omaha. Sagar, we'll start with you.
My name is Sagar, and I run 3 restaurants in town. Kathmandu Momo Station, which is a dumpling place in Exarban, and the food hall. I have we run an Indian concept called Saffron Urban Indian Kitchen. It's in Exarban as well, right across from the HDR building. And then we recently opened a third concept called Cattle Call, which is a modern American kitchen, late night food. And thank you for having me.
Of course, my pleasure to have you here. Tom?
Tom Allisma, Flagship Restaurant Group. We've been in business for 23 years, started here in Omaha. I have to pull up my business card to remember all the concepts we've got, because we've got quite a few. Obviously, the very first one that we started was Blue Sushi. We've got Roja, we've got Blatt, we've got Ghost Donkey now down on 10th and Farnham. We have Flagship Commons. We got Plank. Thinking of the ones that aren't in town. Champagne Lanes is also in town. Memoir. Clio. And there's a couple other brands that aren't here yet that we're working on.
Okay, my name is Carlos Mendez. I currently am a partner in multiple concepts that we have here in the city. One of them is Courant restaurant located in Benson. We are more like a European-inspired kitchen, very regional. We base all our sourcing on as local as we can be. So we kind of working with multiple states, especially in Nebraska, sourcing the best product that we can get. Millwork and Millwork Commons, we got Dolomiti Pizzeria. We opened around a couple years ago, and it's more like a northern Italian-inspired pizzeria. And we have another little space in the HDR building in Exarban Village called Rotisserie Urban Bistro, RUB, and it's a fast casual restaurant. First one that I ever done, and learn a lot from it. And it's basically very healthy meals made from scratch. Feels like home meals pretty much, and that's kind of basically the other concepts. Yeah.
What I love about this group is we have such a wide variety of restaurants. We have a concept that's in a food hall. We have a fine dining tasting menu. We have sushi. We have bars. You guys, between the three of you, are going to be able to speak to so many different styles of restaurants, and I think that that's really unique. So I'm just going to start from a super high level. In your minds, how does a restaurant's design and architecture affect the guest experience?
I think that the atmosphere is so important. It's you've got. I think back about when we opened the original Blue, Willie Thiessen used to come in and said, "You've got everything here. You've got the location, you've got the design, you got the food, and you got the service." So I think it plays so importantly with all those aspects. And I think that I've been to restaurants that have great food, and sometimes the atmosphere is just not there. And I've been to restaurants that have great atmospheres that don't have great food. But I think it's such an important key to the overall experience.
Yeah, I agree. 100%, 120%. That is the most important part. Probably one of the most important part of the process, beside the food, is the flow of the restaurant. I mean, how people gets around, how the employees gets around, the sidelines. I mean, basically the layout and where the furniture is located at. I mean, one example of that is Dolomiti Pizzeria. I think the oven is the center piece of the whole restaurant. I think that has something to do with the smell in the restaurant. You smell the wood, and that kind of gets you excited, and you feel the energy of the place. So that is kind of basically a couple aspects that I think they're super important. Besides, I always said that the location of the kitchen is so important, and the dish pit. Those are two things that I'm always kind of paying attention to be able to make that perfect flow and make the restaurant be efficient.
Lighting as well is very important. Like I feel like I've been to a lot of great designs, but the lighting maybe just way too bright, and it doesn't set the right mood. So lighting's another really key aspect of the design.
Well, it depends what mood you're trying to set. If you're trying to set like a high energy, just very vibrant type of restaurant, maybe you want higher lighting. If you're trying to set kind of more of a moody place or somewhere where you want people to slow down, maybe have a couple drinks, like maybe you bring the lights down a little bit. It just depends on what kind of experience you're looking for. We're going to talk more about lighting because I think that's a fascinating element of all this. Sagar, what do you think?
And I agree with both of them. And I looked at, as soon as you asked the question, I looked at Tom because I have been inspired by his spaces for 20 plus years. Blue was our place to go back in the days, But having said that, and similar, Carlos has done such an amazing job. And I think and I'm not a designer. I'm a hands-on operator, owner who loves to be part of the design element. And I think for us as well, the first and foremost, when we conceptualize, I think the functionality is the key. And within that comes the service flow, how the customers are coming in and leaving the space, and in parallel to that, how our team flows as well. So just to kind of agree with you guys on that.
How do you optimize for flow?
So for us, kitchen, we let the kitchen decide it. So for us, when we pick the equipments and for the placement, for example, saffron, it's an Indian kitchen. Our oven needs to be in a certain position, as that's how the naans come out. And our, that's the tandoor oven, and then our regular oven needs to be in a specific area. So based on how the menu comes out would be big part of how we optimize that. And then the bar, we sit down with our bar manager and say, what's the flow they're looking for? And, in the front of the house, depending on the space, depending on the aesthetics that we're trying to manifest, we do the seatings accordingly as long as the clearance is there we're ADA compliant, if the pass is, coming through a certain direction. So the servers are not in the way of customers and vice versa.
Carlos, you said something fascinating a couple of minutes ago. You said one of the first things you think about, or one of the most important things, is the dish pit.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. Why is that one of the first elements that you think about?
Once, the server or the bartender comes into the kitchen, that they need to release, the dishes, the dirty dishes, the quickest way possible. You don't want them to be walking behind the cooks. You don't want them to be crossing the kitchen from one side to another. So you need to design and understand where you need to land those dishes to be able to make it efficient.
That is something that I would never, when you say it, it makes so much sense, but I would never just think about that intuitively. But you're totally right. Tom, you said something that sparked just a quick memory. The other night, I went out to eat, and I waited about 20 minutes for my food, but I was just kind of sitting and hanging out before I got anything. And the atmosphere of this restaurant that I was at was just so pleasurable. It was so welcoming. It was so fun. Like, I just loved how the space was. Before I had a bite of food, I was already having a good time. When you guys go to a restaurant, what are some of the first things that you notice when it comes to the design or the flow of the restaurant?
I'd say that the artwork, the materials are so important. Again, going back to the layout, I think really the how you orchestrate the space so that when people are in there, whenever they're looking around, and every which way, there's nothing really boring about the space. There's always something visually interesting to see, and there's always elements that are either centerpieces or just, again, visually interesting.
I think along that line, for me as well, I the first thing, not from a very technical perspective, but for me, it's like as soon as I walk in, how do I feel? Like you said, some places are just welcoming. They put together, they curate every little piece so well. Memoir is my recent experience, for example. Dolomiti, I was there the other day, and similar. Two different vibes, two different concepts, but when you get there, you feel comfortable and you feel good. With Dolomiti, for example, the focal point just being the kitchen, open kitchen, it just gave the. I've never been to North Italy, but it felt like I was part of North Italy for the 1 hour I was there. And Memoir, when I walked in, I think I've been there several times, and I was blown away with every little detail. And bathroom was my favorite part, besides the kitchen.
Yeah.
I walked in the bathroom, and I'm not somebody who goes and takes pictures of bathroom, but I was compelled to take pictures because as a restaurant guy, I was like, man, it's just so. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's the feeling that I get, and that's what I apply in my concept as well. It's a lot of nostalgia. It's even though it was my first time going to Memoir, I felt like I've seen some of these elements before. It just feels like something feels right, So for me, I might not grasp onto one particular thing, but I think I'm aligned with your wife. I go in there and I start looking at the kitchen. The first thing I look at is kitchen. I'm like, oh my God, when did I think of it? Or something along that line. And just touching and feeling. I'm a toucher, feeler, so I would start touching the furnitures. And so to me, every little detail just comes together instead of just picking one part. And, when people do it so well, overall, you just walk out thinking of your next reservation.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah. It makes it very cohesive. I mean, that's the way I see that restaurant. I've been multiple times there too, and I'm like, when I open the doors and get in, it's like, oh, it's a beautiful design, very well done. You see the plating, you see the execution, how people are moving around, they're bumping into each other or not. That is something that I'm always paying attention. How many employees are, how many servers are, how many bartenders, how they're moving around. The bar is a very interesting, like a part of the restaurant. I mean, if you don't make it, fast, the people cannot execute the drinks, fast enough, you technically are losing an opportunity to sell. So you need to kind of make sure that the guys have a great flow and move around and they get the bottles at the right place. So I'm always paying attention to every single detail. Probably my favorite place to sit is in a bar, every restaurant that I go, and from there I kind of turn around and see, okay, this is what's happening. I think that's the center of the restaurant. The majority of the time, especially, a Memoir.
I'd say that. I'd say that part of the experience is kind of telling a story. I'll go all the way back to the original Blue that we had on 144th and Maple when we opened that. We did a lot of the construction ourselves back in 2002, and the concept that I had behind that one was just really simple. It was just taking you outside of Omaha. And I was really, at the time, just inspired by the West Coast. And we had traveled to the West Coast and experienced sushi from the West Coast, which was more fusion. And at that time, there was nothing like that in Omaha. It was very traditional sushi Ichiban and sushi Japan. Those were the only two options in Omaha. There was nothing that was fusion. So the idea behind that concept was trying to bring something different to Omaha. So when you were there, we opened, actually, it'll be the 23rd anniversary of Blue would be November 23rd of '02. So yeah, it's coming up here next week. And when we opened in November. It had this really cool beach vibe almost inside. So I think again, there was the artwork in there, the lighting, all the materials that we picked. It took you outside of Omaha. And I had a lot of people tell me that. I have a lot of people tell me that they don't feel like they're in Omaha when they come to our places, which is a pretty cool compliment. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I would definitely agree with that. And it's amazing because I would say that, and we're just given so many kudos to Memoir, but truly, when you go in there, I mean, I think the first time I went there, I looked around, I'm like, I feel like I'm eating in a 5-star hotel, and not like this is a hotel restaurant, but this is like such a cool space. And then you go to Clio, and it is an entirely different vibe, entirely different atmosphere. I feel like I'm like out on a Greek beach. Like it's just incredible. Carlos, I want to talk about the pizza oven because the pizza oven has already come up several times in this conversation. And I think it's really interesting when I think about restaurants that have that giant wood burning oven. Dante, Dolomiti, Moots, Via Farina. Where is it? It is front and center. It is the first thing when you walk in the restaurant, you see that. And that sets the vibe. It's like, oh, okay, we're going to all gather around this giant thing that's going to cook our food, and we're going to have a good time together. Not just with the pizza oven. That's a great example. But for all three of you, how important is it for a restaurant to kind of have a focal point? Does a restaurant need to have something like that pizza oven that kind of centers everything and kind of creates a gravity around it? Or is it more of a cohesive overall experience sometimes?
I think that it sets the vibe. I mean, right from when people open the doors. That's kind of what I really think that it is. It gives a straight message that the customer in probably in 5 seconds figure out where the person is and what he's going to get. I think that is always the goal when somebody opens the doors. And yeah, I mean, the oven, we come from Verona, Italy. It's a rotating oven that is dual. It gives us the opportunity to do gas and do a wood, and it works amazingly well. The gas helps us to have our temperatures pretty stable, pretty stabilized, and then we can make consistent pizzas with that rotating bottom. So we spend a lot of time doing that research, and yeah, I agree with you. I think that is the centerpiece of the restaurant, and I think that in Courant, the centerpiece is actually the bar. That's what I believe in, and it's funny because that was something that happened organically. I own a Spanish restaurant in that same location, and I took over the restaurant in 2008. And I was doing a little research today, and that was built in 1925. I think that the vibe of that of that building is amazing, and I think that has a lot to do with it. It comes with a lot of sacrificing because, for example, the acoustic of that place is terrible. We have complaints of customers. So you were saying how important it is. Yeah, there are customers that complain about how noisy the restaurant can be because, of course, it's brick, with high ceilings and then wood, on floors. So it makes it very complicated. And whoever goes to the restaurant in the next weeks, we've been adding some panels, and so we've been trying to kind of work around putting some paneling on the bottom of the chairs, trying to kind of accommodate and control a little bit the noise. But yeah, it's always a challenge. So that's kind of what it takes. It comes with the building, so you gotta kind of embrace it.
The pizza oven is also the most expensive piece of equipment you got to buy, so you got to show it off.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, you get something like that, you don't hide it back behind a wall. What do you guys think? Is it important for a restaurant to have a focal point, or can there just be kind of an overall vibe that you create?
I think it's very important to have a focal point. Like going back to Memoir, the bar is central, but then when you come in, you can see the kitchen behind, and you can see the chefs. And I also like to sit at the bar there and watch. At Clio in the dining room, that we have that major tree with the three circular booths around that. It feels like that really anchors the room really well. And when you drive by on Howard or on 12th, and you look into that dining room, I think it's got great curb appeal. I think that it really helps to have that centerpiece. Absolutely.
And I agree, and I think that it could either be intentional or people will find a focal point. So if it's intentional, for example, we started with a small shop in Blackstone. It was just the space I was looking for, hole in the wall, and then we were right next to Scriptown for about 5 years. So you walk in, and all you can see is the counter, and the steamer is right behind the counters. So depending on a space and the concept, I feel you're going for, kind of dictates that as well. But when if you have a space that allows that, then if you're intentional about it, then you can drive that focus to whatever you're trying to highlight. And I agree with both of them. It's the most expensive part. I was just looking at it. I was like, how much do these cost? They cost arm and a leg. And it's a beautiful piece. I think it's hand done, right? Handmade. So, yeah.
Chipped in pieces here, and the guys took around 6 hours to be able to kind of put all that together. And it was fun.
I saw that whole process.
The whole process was very fun and kind of interesting to see.
Yeah. So, for us at Saffron and Cattle Call, for example, very similar to Tom's thought process. We wanted bar to be the focal point, but in the background, the kitchen's still open, so you can still see it's an open kitchen. You can still see the cooks and the chefs doing their thing, and it kind of, when it's intentional, I feel you're able to guide what is that you want to highlight.
We've mentioned open kitchens several times. Because you guys both have restaurants that have open kitchens and closed as well. Mm-hmm. What are the pros and cons of incorporating an open kitchen into your concept?
I think it's more probably it's more execution. I think that it's fun for people, for the customer sit down at the bar or sit down and be able to see what's happening behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. I think that is kind of the base part. On our end, we always need to kind of make sure that everything is clean and neat and it looks, and you got to kind of have that extra job, on the restaurant to keep everybody on board, that everything needs to be even extra clean than how it is every time. So yeah, I think it's more the experience. It gets, the customer feel that they're part of the restaurant, they're part of what's happening, and they're excited to see what the chef is cooking, the cooks are cooking. So that is kind of the way I see it from my end.
And I agree. I'd say that having that open kitchen really adds to the experience for the customer. I think that's important. I'm looking at my list of restaurants again, and I can't think of any restaurants that are completely closed off. There's always a window into the kitchen somehow, some way, whether it be just a window or just completely open like Memoir. More and more, the designs that we're working on right now are mostly all open. Like we're trying to really expose the kitchen as much as possible. There is some code issues you have to deal with. Like if you want to have open garage doors or anything like that, having open kitchens, you have to add more fans to the exterior of the building to make sure that you keep those elements out. So it does add a more of expense to do that.
I love the concept of an open kitchen. As a food nerd, there are some restaurants where I could go and not even eat, and I would just sit there and watch, for hours. And it's so fascinating just to see the flow and the communication, how the kitchen works. But from you guys' end, that requires a lot of trust in your team, because you're given all that visibility into the kitchen. So if the chef has a Gordon Ramsay moment and he's blowing up, or if service is just going down in flames, if your cooks are in the weeds and they can't handle it, all of a sudden everybody in the restaurant sees that and they feel that. And all of a sudden that atmosphere, that feeling that we're talking about, it starts to feel a little tense and it doesn't feel quite as good. Is there, I don't want to say a risk to having an open kitchen, but how do you ensure that you have the culture to support an open kitchen, I guess?
I see it as training. I mean, you hire, I mean, the right staff, I mean, for the position, and they execute. I mean, you always want to find, I mean, somebody trained and somebody who understands what they're doing, and the safety of the customer is always important, so they kind of follow the different steps and the different rules. I think that is kind of the most important part of the process. I mean, on my end, is just make sure that, you know, the customer is always safe. I mean, they follow the protocols.
In my career of this business, I really actually haven't heard of any nightmare stories like that. I also think that when the restaurant's busy on a Friday or Saturday night, if that were to occur with the music and just everything that's going on, I think that I don't know how noticeable it would be. I just feel like if somebody's going to have a moment like that, they'd probably get pulled into an area and cool down and talked to, and I really don't think we've ever had a major issue like that.
You know, in Courant, we have a closed kitchen, and the speed, what you can notice when you go from the dining to the kitchen is the speed. The kitchen is going 1,000 miles, I mean, per hour. Everybody's moving around, but when you open the door, you see how quiet, I mean, is the front of the restaurant. That is it kind of give you a pretty interesting feeling of, you know, what's happening up here. You feel like, okay, this is the two different worlds that are happening, that you are in right now. But yeah, that is probably one of the advantages of having a closed kitchen. But yeah, I mean, on my end, we have Dolomiti. We have a little window that people can see. Is really not what we did it more, I mean, to be able to expedite the food quicker. That is basically what it was. The center of attention, I mean, the show is at the pizza station. So that's kind of how they open. So that's kind of how we embrace it. We have technically two kitchens, I mean, in that space.
When you guys come up with a concept, how much communication do you have with the head chef who's going to be running the place? I'm sure that you involve them to some extent, but what is that dialogue like?
Well, for me, I've been very fortunate that at Saffron, Duesh is our head chef. He's also our co-partner. So it was a very seamless process. He would tell us, this is what I need, this is how the food will come out, this is how we'll cook it. But also, you know, I don't consider myself a chef, but I've worked in the kitchen long enough to kind of know the flow. So for Momo Station, it was pretty simple. We deal with steamers, fryers. For cattle call, however, the challenge for us was it was an existing electric-driven kitchen. There's no gas in there. So for that, we did bring in somebody to come in and kind of look into it. But I think more than chef is the menu, for me at least, right? So whenever we're conceptualizing a space, we're thinking of a menu first. And when we have the menu, even if we're not cooking the menu in its entirety, we kind of have an idea of what needs to be done and, you know, kind of do reverse engineering if needed. Because in cattle call, the chef, we had a chef that was supposed to join us, and something happened to him, and he couldn't join us, and we had to make a lot of tweaks because Dom came into our life very last minute, and he did an amazing job, flipped the whole menu. So, you know, in that case, it was a little tricky, but I would say most of the time, you know, the lines are pulled in a certain way, and as long as you have the clearance for movement, in my experience, moving some appliances here and there has been pretty easy.
On my end, Courant was it was an interesting project because we didn't put the menu until a week before we opened. My business partner there, Ben Mates, I mean, he's a master, so he figured out, I mean, exactly the concept and how it was going to work. Of course, we were comfortable with the kitchen already because we used it in the past. So we have a Garmo side, which is kind of the cold side. All the salads and all the amuses, I mean, comes out. But on the other end, you got the pasta station and you have the satay station and meats. So it works pretty well. There's basically two sides of the kitchen that they produce, and then you have the expediter in the middle that is sends, I mean, the food, I mean, to the table. So for us, I mean, we make the decision last minute. In Dolomiti, Chef Roberto Garcia, he jumped in probably 4 months before. We opened the restaurant, and he went through the construction. We literally opened the restaurant the day after we got all the permits. We needed to open. It's like, when we're going to open now. I mean, like yesterday. That's kind of how it happened. And he put together an amazing menu that it worked pretty well for the restaurant. So, the flow is great, I mean, with the kitchen and the timing of the food and the pizza. So that one works pretty well. In Rob, that's a different story. Rob being a fast casual restaurant, basically we needed to execute, I mean, in mass-produced food and be able to kind of rotate it as it goes. So it was a lot easier. That's kind of exactly what I got in mind. We run Rob with 5 pieces of equipment, probably 4 pieces of equipment in that kitchen. So it's pretty simple, but it's very, very cost-effective in a way, the way it's kind of run the kitchen on the front.
It's a ongoing process with us. We have certain team members that work on certain projects. Like you've had Nestor on the show before. Nestor's really focuses on all our blue new locations for layouts. Ben's helped us with Memoir and Clio. I think we also had him working with Ryan Wally. I don't know if Ryan's been on the show. Ryan was another chef that worked in Omaha for a while. He's now in Arizona. I remember when we were doing Pyro, he actually flew to a restaurant in Tennessee in Nashville and worked in that kitchen on a piece of equipment that we were buying, and it was a very expensive piece of equipment. So he went and actually worked in that kitchen and under that chef for like a week or two to understand how it worked and operated, and then came back and worked with us to lay out the kitchen to best suit and lay it out with that piece of equipment in mind. And that is a centerpiece when you're at Pyro in Arizona. That's front and center, just like your guys' pizza ovens, because you got to show it off. It's such a cool piece of equipment. So,
as you're designing the restaurant, how do you determine how you're going to allocate space and resources for the kitchen versus the dining room and the guest? Because I'm sure, chef and his team want as much space as you can give them, but the more space that you give them, the fewer tables that you get for guests. But you also don't want to, there are restaurants that make this work, but you don't want to shove your kitchen into a broom closet. It's just so you can maximize space. How do you guys find that balance as you're creating a restaurant?
Well, there is a rule of thumb, right? That I think it's 30% of...
It's about a third. Yeah,
that's kind of a third of the space.
Yeah, typically. Yeah. It's usually the third, and you're always going to have the front of that, you're going to have your storefront that you're always going to want to have for your dining room, and then the back of the house, closer to the typical alley. But yeah, 1/3's typically for the kitchen and the bar and everything else that goes along with that. So that's typically, and every seat that you don't have is money that you're not bringing in. So the more seats you've got, obviously there's a balance there. The kitchen's got to keep up with that seat count as well.
Well, that brings up another thing that I want to talk about, the balance. Like, how do you create a great experience for the guests? Because if you talk about the more tables you have, the more revenue that you can have, obviously, but you don't want to pack everybody in like sardines. If I'm trying to have an intimate dinner with my wife and we're 2 feet away from the table next to us, that's not going to feel like a good experience. So how do you balance like creating the vibe that you want and maximizing the density?
It's a good question. So that's kind of a lot to dig in there, because really, in our cases, we're always looking for spaces that are about 5,000 square feet. If it's smaller than 5,000 square feet, we're going to have to look hard at it. And I'll tell you, Clio's 3,800 square feet, which is pretty small, but we've been very fortunate that it gets a great lunch business and it's always busy. So we're always the seats are always full. There's really not a lot of downtime there. So for us, I'd say that when we're out looking around the country, we're always looking at something that's around 5,000 square feet, and we're always looking for about 150 seats is kind of that sweet spot for us. It's that seat count that we've kind of grown into, and that's where we're always trying to shoot for.
We're definitely smaller. We aim for 70 seats, 75 seats. And, you know, the way I started to doing it now, I mean, it's always a process. The way you open your first restaurant is never the same way you open your last one. And there's a lot of learning during the whole process. And to me, I try to find actually something, 4,000 is kind of what I'm always looking for. And then I sit down and say, okay, well, this is the location, this is the rent. I mean, how many people I need a seat? And turn tables to be able to pay my rent, to be able to kind of pay my expenses. So that is kind of how we're starting to kind of build or concepts and see if it's feasible or not. Can I need a seat? I mean, 200 people in a day? Okay, can I? Do I have? I'm going to have there's the population to be able to do it. I mean, there is a need. I mean, for the concept. So there's a lot of things that are involved in the whole decision-making part. But on my end, beside the vision of the restaurant and the food that you want to offer, to me, I'm the numbers side of the business. So I sit down and that's kind of how I do it. It's okay, well, it's feasible to be able to seat us 70 people or 120, whatever the number is.
Yeah. Mine is aligned with Carlos. I don't look for a particular size place. It depends on, the location. For example, the cattle call space that came along is 2,200 square feet. And I would say probably 50-50, 50 is seating. So our space is tight. We have, and we didn't want to do much with the remodeling because it just adds up. So we wanted to kind of roll out. Our lease was up at Momo, so we needed a space. So the way, our spaces are actually pretty tight. So cattle call, you will be sitting and 14 to 18 inches away from people. But I think it also depends on the concept itself. Mm-hmm. For me, I love that intimacy, even though, because just to add to Tom, during busy time, I think you're just so focused on the person across from you. There's music. There's so many acoustics going on in the kitchen. We have a tiny kitchen there, open kitchen as well, where if you're seated here, the corner seat is no farther than probably 15 feet from the kitchen. Oh, wow. So, we're pretty tight. Yeah. And you, on a busy night, you'll see Rocky and I grabbing a table and making room, the Goodfellas style, So I think for us, seating I'm also the numbers guy for my concept. Rocky handles most of the operations. So we have a window to make whatever we make at that night. So certain concepts do well throughout the day. Clio is one of them. I can't get a reservation there.
I can't either.
So, for a smaller space like ours, we have a window, let's say, from 6 till 8. That's our time. And whatever we bring in that day, and during that time is what we bring in for that day. So in our busy time, we'll cramp them up. In cattle calls scenario, people seem to enjoy it, so the thought process behind that is just to keep it open, but when times are needed, we'll just make it a vibe by putting tables together sometimes. And I also think, is your concept more of a neighborhood style? We're downtown, but we're not downtown. We're in 16th and Farnham. So when we sit down in the evening service and look, I think 30% of the patrons who are there know each other to some degree. So if it's a bigger space, so it's almost like an afterthought for me in my concepts. Maybe we're just not to that level yet, So we look at the space. For example, Exarban space was a yoga studio before us. And I loved that space. That was the first space I wanted 10 years ago as a cafe, and Noddles wouldn't give it to me because they already had committed to roast, which does an amazing job. And then the yoga studio came. So when the place became available, I would just go and window shop. I would just look inside. I think I did that for 6 months because it was the biggest project for us, you know. And in that space, I have more of the privilege to do a better seating on a place like Cattle Call as a restaurateur and an entrepreneur. I think it's a living document for us. Whatever works, we make a lot of mistakes. We hear people. If they're saying, this is too close, my guy, then we'll kind of move them around. Or if it's just Dan Hoppen coming in with Sarah, I'll make sure the tables are not too tight. You know? So that's how it works. Yeah.
You know, it's funny because I relate completely to you on that regard. In Courant right now, we seat 65. At the same time, it's kind of the capacity of the dining. You can push it to a 70. But during España's days, we used to crank 95 people in that restaurant. People were shoulder to shoulder, and they loved it. Mm-hmm. So I think the concept really has a lot to do with it. I mean, the energy of the concept, I mean, how people relate to it, and that concept was sharing food, and, you know, it was pretty open and pretty easy to be able to kind of feel comfortable, be surrounded, and be shoulder to shoulder with a lot of people.
I think you just hit on it right there, Carlos. That would be my takeaway, because I know you joked, like, if Sarah and I come in, you'll make sure we have plenty of space. It depends on the atmosphere and the night that we're looking for. So if we come into Cattle Call, I'm not expecting, you know, to have probably intimate date night. Yeah. We're going to go somewhere. We're going to go there with friends. It's a bar, so we're going to have a couple drinks. Mm-hmm. We're going to get a bunch of plates. We're going to share. We might talk to the table next to us. If they have something that looks great, I might go, hey, what did you guys order? Like, we need to get that. If I come into Memoir, that's not the experience that I'm expecting, that I'm looking for. That's not what you're trying to create. You're looking to have people be a little bit more set apart in their own areas so they can have conversation amongst each other. So I think that, yeah, so much of it does depend on the concept, because seating people super close to each other is not necessarily a bad thing. Just like spreading people out isn't necessarily a bad thing. It depends on what you're going for and what you want the restaurant to say, what you want people to feel, right?
Yep. And Carlos said that very well. I think as a restaurateur, when you are putting out a concept, I think you are the driver to say, this is the experience I want to give, right? So if you want a Memoir experience, you have operator who has laid out that very thoughtfully. If you want an Courant experience or a Cattle Call, so you know, sometimes it's very thought out. Sometimes I feel we make adjustments as we go.
Okay, Tom, about 40 minutes ago, you brought up the concept of light, and I said we'd come back to it. Mm-hmm. This is that moment. We're coming back to it. How do you guys approach lighting when it comes to your restaurants?
Well, we work with our engineers very closely to make sure that we usually come up with, so from the architectural side, we'll come up with a lighting design, and then we'll work with the engineers to make sure that it's done properly. And then we go through and make sure that every zone, like at, I'm just trying to think, at Clio, for example, in that dining room, there's, I think, 3 or 4 zones, and you can adjust all that lighting, and it's also automated. We've, over the years, if you know, most houses have slide dimmers. That was something that we had from day one, and it's evolved into being able to create scenes and have basically full bright lights for when you're closed, so for cleaning. And then you have like a lunch setting, you've got a happy hour setting, and you've got a night setting. So the lights are changing and dimming as the day goes on. It's a group effort between the engineers and us, and we also have some really talented designers in-house at Flagship, and they're usually doing a lot of the selections of the lights for each area, just to create the moods that we're looking for.
It's a different story in my restaurants. Sam Bloomer is the GM of Courant. He is the lighting engineer. He is the one paying attention what's happening and how's the lighting, and then he adjusts it. Yeah. Tim and me and Dolo were the ones. I mean, you see people eating and say, like, okay, I mean, the sun is gone. We need to do it. We consider to get a panel to kind of manage that, but I don't know, we were a little bit afraid. We heard that it was great, but it wasn't at the same time. So really to be able to manage it, and sometimes becomes more a problem. Probably it's easier just to go and kind of take the kind of look up and ups down, and that is kind of basically what we do. Of course, it would be nice to be able to have a panel to be able to manage it that way, but in our case, we got to do it ourselves. We're like making sure that it's the right feeling and the right lighting for the moment.
Back in 15 years ago, it was slide dimmers, and I'd walk into a restaurant, in one of my restaurants, and the lights would be super bright at 8 o'clock at night. So I'd run back there and do that. With the amount of restaurants we have now, we have to automate it, because it's just the light to make sure that the customer is getting the right experience. You really can't rely on all these managers across the country to be on it every night. So it's just something that we have to do.
The first restaurant that I really experienced, this isn't true, but the first time I noticed it, the power of light, I think, was dining at the Committee Chop House. Because Omaha has so many steakhouses, and a lot of them have kind of a similar vibe. They're quiet, the lights are low, you're kind of expecting, I don't want to say like kind of a more old-timey feel, but something where it's going to be a little bit darker. It's it's something special. When we walked into the Committee Chop House, which is the steakhouse in the Cottonwood Hotel, the lights are bright, at least much brighter than you would have in a steakhouse, and it's like it's almost jarring at first, but I think it kind of sets the mood, because the Committee is so different from any other steakhouse I've been to. I mean, they're doing innovative things. They're putting twists on steaks and having different preparations than you see at the classic Omaha steakhouses. So I think that was just a fascinating way. I think they almost set the tone from the minute you walk in that this is not going to be your normal steakhouse. This is going to be something a little bit different. And just by the lighting, they can convey that. I find that to be fascinating. As you guys design spaces, what are some ways, and you've kind of mentioned things here and there, but that you can create cohesion between front and back of house?
You want me to go first?
Yeah, you go first.
Material usage for sure. I'd say memoir. If you notice, the entire kitchen, inside the kitchen that you see from the customer side, is all that green tile, and then it comes out into the dining room for the fascia, for basically the backdrop of the dining room. Clio as well. A lot of the materials, you can't completely see into that kitchen. You can see the grill, but a lot of the materials are kind of flowing between front and back of house, if that makes sense. We do it at Blue a lot. We do it with making sure that we have whatever tile we're using in the kitchen, and we bring it to the front of the house. It's, I think, really not only visually having the connection, but also through materials.
Mm-hmm.
From my end, I don't have a full open kitchen, so for me it will be kind of complicated to say. We always want to incorporate a little bit of what you have in the back and the front, but for me, at this point, I mean, as the restaurants that I open, I haven't had one that I really kind of had the need to be able to kind of make it more cohesive in a way.
Well, I like the way that you took that question, Tom, into the design of it, but I was kind of thinking, like, how do you, through the design and the way that things are structured, do you have the best communication between your back of house and front of house staff to make sure that that feels cohesive for them and it doesn't feel like two separate environments? Does that make sense? No?
Yeah, no, it makes sense, but I'm trying to kind of find the link to connect them in both, and it's kind of complicated.
Okay.
Beside the fact that you come in and then you're going to drop, the dishes in the ideal place, and then you see the people cooking and you turn around, there's not much walking between your satay to where you're going to land, and sell your food. So that is kind of the only way I can kind of probably connect to that question.
And I'd say out of the restaurants we've been talking about tonight, Memoir does it well because of where the expo line is to pick up food, where drinks are picked up, and where dishes are dropped off. you don't see where the dishes are getting dropped off, but it's a good. It's not that far away. It's hidden, but it's a very easy drop. Kind of that triangle of food, drinks, and then drop off. I think just making sure that you're not running 100 yards that way to drop off dishes, like you mentioned earlier. You don't want to be running behind the chef. Making sure that the food, the drink, and the dish drops are well placed. I think that's a very helpful thing for the success of front and back, just so that there's not a lot of running around.
We were lucky. I'm sorry. We were lucky in Dolomiti. The way we kind of design the bar, it gives us that extra way in the back, right exactly by the back, where the window is for people to walk and flow. And we were worried. How people are going to grab the food. We're going to have an expediter full time to be able to kind of grab the food and run it to avoid any accidents and anything. And we ended up opening, there's 2 openings, on each side of the bar, and people actually flows pretty well. They walk by, they grab the food, and they go on the other end. So for us, I think that we were lucky. I think that it worked out better than we envisioned. But yeah, everything, and when you opened that question, something came to my mind, because I remember taping the floor with Tim in Dolomiti, because we were like, we need to have an idea how this restaurant is going to look and what's going to be the space. We grabbed some green tape, and we had spent probably a good 5 hours taping the floor, trying to figure out, okay, the kitchen is going to be here. This is where the hood is going to be, this area. So we kind of had a better idea how the floor was going to go and what changes we needed to make.
Yeah. Well, for us, I think when I look at both of the restaurants, it's very similar, and a lot of restaurants do that. There's a clear separation of the kitchen and the pickup place or drop off. But the fact that all of us, Dolomiti and most of his concepts and our concept, have an open kitchen, I think the visuals help quite a bit to make that connections. The chef in the past can always see the floor, so they know, what the pop is like outside, or they can tell who's occupied or not. And also having, I think, the flow in such a way that, for example, for us at Saffron, they pick up the food and they can't ignore the bar. They have to go through the bar. So whatever their cocktails, their wines, whatever is sitting, they can tell it's theirs, or they will have a glance of that, at least from a peripheral vision. So, and most of the restaurants, I think, do a great job at connecting the back of the house and front of the house. I think when we have an open kitchen, it's definitely a positive. Yeah.
You guys have all worked on fine dining concepts and a little bit more, maybe not fast casual, but casual concepts. Do you gravitate more towards one or the other, and why?
For me, I started as a street food guy. I did pop-ups. The dumplings that you guys tried today was done in front of my cafe and a stove, just like how things would be at home. So that's my go-to. But as a restaurant guy, I've always looked up to Carlos's Courant, for example. Everything he does with so much love and care in the food. So for me, it's a challenge and something that I've been wanting to get into that space. And Cattle Call, I wouldn't say we're completely in that domain, but we are making an effort to work with young talents where we could, while they assist us in amazing food, we kind of showcase what Omaha has to offer. So for me, that's the biggest thing. In the recent days, I'm blown away by what they bring to the table. And so now I'm very much romanticizing with the idea of what Boiler Room does, or V-Merts does, or Courant does, or Yoshitomo does. So that's where I'm at in my journey.
Cool, man. I grew up eating a lot of street food in Latin America. So that's, I think an example of that was the Hunger Block when I opened the Hunger Block. So, but the reality is that my first baby was España, and España was a red tablecloth, like a restaurant, that it was more, not necessarily considered fine dining, but it was something new for the city, and the people embraced it more like a fine dining style. And from there, I've been like a jumping everywhere. I mean, I opened Little España, and with Little España, my goal was to change that tablecloth, make it more casual, and that was 15 years ago when I opened that restaurant, probably 16 years ago. And I spent a lot of time in Chicago, in New York, in Miami, and I brought a menu that probably I could be serving right now. But at that time was too early, in a way, for the city, and I ended up changing the menu to the same that I had at España. So then from there, I decided, like, I'm going to close Courant, and I'm going to jump now. I'm going to close España, and I'm going to open Courant. And then we go into fine dining, but it's still casual. It's a casual atmosphere where we're serving it. We try to make it, approachable and easy and delicious. But then I jump into the Hunger Block on the other end, and I bring street food, and the city embraced it in such an amazing way. And unfortunately, I was forced to close it because I couldn't find staff at some point after the pandemic, and I needed my lunch, which was my bread and butter in that restaurant. Then I'm like, with the things that I learned during the pandemic, I said, okay, let me step back. Let me think what is going to be the next step. And then I jump and open Dolomiti, which is a very heavy takeout concept. I mean, it's we're getting more and more takeout orders, which has been a blessing. And, in case that something happened again, we're ready for it. And then Rob jumped in and right after, and that was the idea as well. So I've been kind of changing, moving in different directions. But if you ask me, Dolomiti probably and Rob has been the biggest challenges that we had. Even though we're busy, you have to deal with other different problems, to be able to execute for the volume of people that are coming, or how you present a new fast casual restaurant to the clientele, make them feel comfortable to come and eat. So that is kind of basically how I've been moving. So yeah, I love street food. I think that is kind of my biggest passion. But I've been involved with great people, great chefs, and I always embrace every concept, and I try to do my best in every single of them.
I'd say that you may consider Memoir and Cleo fine dining, but I think that we're always very conscious about the fact that we don't want to turn anybody off. We've never had a restaurant that we've done any tablecloths. We've always talked about, we want to make sure that when you go in there, you could be seated next to somebody, in suits and ties, and you can also be seated by somebody that's in tank top and shorts. So we never want to create anything too fine dining. I think that once you do that, you're kind of, I think you're potentially maybe limiting your audience.
Sure.
So I think that we were always, from day one, when we started the original Blue, we always wanted to make sure that we were just open to every customer base coming in. So we've got, I'm really excited. We've got 2 or 3 memoirs in the planning, out of state, along with some out of state Cleos. So that, we've been doing Blue now for 23 years, and we're at number 24, I believe. And, we're excited to expand these new concepts outside of the state, and potentially some new ones out in West Omaha as well. We've been actively searching for space for Memoir and Cleo in West Omaha. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Something to look forward to.
Yeah.
Guys, this has been absolutely fascinating. We have touched on just like the tiniest bit. Like, we are the Titanic right now, and we just see that tiny little bit of the iceberg that nobody is worried about, and then there's this giant thing underneath. There is so much more that we could learn. Unfortunately, we're up against it on time, but I'm so grateful for you guys taking the time to come out to serve awesome food and to be a part of this podcast tonight. This was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
In Omaha, thanks for eating with us.